These are hard times for newspaper reporters, fewer of them, and fewer of them doing the old-fashioned job of digging for stories that impact citizens and taxpayers. So as I have said on this show before, thank God for Teri Sforza. She's the Orange County Register investigative reporter who heads up the paper's Watchdog column. Over the years, she's exposed tax dodges, sweetheart deals, pension spiking, you name it. But she's done it with a good-natured style that leaves you smiling and shaking your head more than pulling out your hair. So what makes the Watchdog tick, and what's she watching these days? Teri Sforza, right now on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by 5 Point. 5 Point is an independent real estate development company with assets under management across California. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
Memorial Care is transforming the way healthcare is delivered, keeping our communities and businesses healthy by guiding them on the path to wellness with easily accessible hospitals, physician offices, and outpatient centers. Memorial Care, leading the way.
So you're a refugee of sorts. You have that.
I suppose I am. I've never thought of it that way, but yeah, I like that.
Okay. Hi, I'm Rick Reiff. Welcome to Inside OC, and I'm talking with the OC Register's Teri Sforza. Teri, great to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
I have followed with great interest and admiration your columns over the year. You are the watchdog. People who read the Register, you need no introduction. For the others, let's give them a sense of some of the things they're missing, because you really go in and dig and get stories. Let's start. How did the Watchdog come about? How long have you been doing this?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've always done sort of accountability work, and people get into journalism because they think they know better, right? This is the right way to do things, and you're trained to be impartial and to show both sides. But you're trying to make things better, right? It's sort of an activist pursuit, I think. You start to do this, and I had done accountability stories over the years. The Register and all newspapers, I think back in the late 90s, early 2000s, frantically trying to figure out how to survive. What do we do that nobody else can do? And, there was a lot of dog and sweater stories and feel-good stuff. And, I was like, we can keep an eye on local government in a way that, the LA Times can't, the New York Times, this is what we can do. And I was such a pain in the butt about trying to do more of this. It just sort of was like, well, why don't I just do this myself? And back then, that was a couple of regimes ago, Ken Brusick was the editor, and we sort of pitched this column. We're going to do this column. It's going to be new. It's going to have some attitude. It's going to be online. The Watchdog, and we're going to, look every day at local governments and just really see what they're doing, what they're spending their money on. And we're going to say, should we be spending our money that way? We don't need to answer that question necessarily, but we want to raise that question so that other people can consider it and answer it themselves. So we started doing that. It wasn't a column at first. It was just a news exercise. And Ken Brusick got so many angry phone calls from people about the things that we were writing that he said, you know what, you're a column now. And they took my picture. It was a bad hair day for me.
So he liked the fact that people were calling.
No, I don't think he did like the fact that people were calling. I think he liked the fact that we were getting a reaction, but he, as all of us, were trying to negotiate that line between telling the truth and being completely
And is this
objective.
late 90s or?
No, this was 2008.
2008? Gosh, it seems like you've been doing this forever.
It does feel like it. It was 2008.
But what amazes me is, as I listened, I thought, this is what newspapers are supposed to do. Why does it take this groundswell from the troops to go to the editors and say, hey, why don't we start covering what local governments are doing and where money's being wasted and things? That seems like such a natural.
It does to some of us, but again, you're the head of a news organization, so you see, like, you're trying to be so much to so many. The Register says, you've got sports, and you've got your government, you've got lifestyle, there's so much, and what do people want? And that has been more of a question that newspapers, all news organizations are having to answer, where we didn't used to worry so much about it.
It's funny you said people called and complained. Were these the people you were writing about, the public officials
Sometimes,
or whoever?
yeah.
Because readers, I would think readers would like it. Did you ever get feedback from readers?
Oh, you know, those days when we were doing the, you know, everyday blogs and stuff, really hyper-local back in 2008, 9, 10, 11, we got fabulous feedback. It was incredible fun. And we got, I mean, feedback from the elected officials, you know, and this is one of the most rewarding things for me was our city council official reported back to me that they were at a, you know, SANDAG or Southern California Association of Governments meeting, and they were talking about how to make things better, and somebody raised their hand and said, just call Teri Sforza. And that was the most fabulous thing, because, you know, it would be like something, well, you know, so-and-so, they're going to raise their, you know, city council salaries X, Y, Z, and you could just throw that online and people would get all crazy and upset, and then they would call Ken Brusick and he would come back and give me that look, and then we would become a column. So yes, it got great feedback. It still gets great feedback. I have Harry Rocky, if you're out there. He's a nice gentleman. Harry Rocky, he's in Laguna Woods, and he's been writing to me on a typewriter since 2008 about these columns. And I mean, it's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Wow.
So yeah.
Let's talk about some of your, some of the stories you've done. What is, let's talk, you tell me one of your favorite stories.
Oh, I have so many. But from the Watchdog days, you know, and these are sort of small, I think, but there was, when we first started, the Metropolitan Water District, which, as you know, controls the world, and it really does control the world in Southern California. It provides all of our water, basically, was going to hike the pensions, right? It was going to just sweeten the pensions for everybody there. And this was right in 2008, right as the whole economy was starting to slide down the proverbial toilet. And somebody called and said, this is going to cost, you know, millions and millions of dollars that we don't have. And it was, you know, somebody on the inside who was trying to do the right thing for the, you know, the people, the taxpayers. And you know, we jumped on that, and we, you know, again, this is all public stuff. There were, you know, reports from the actuaries saying, you know, this is going to be expensive, and should we really do this? And the radio people took that and sort of ran with it.
And did it?
And it went down. Yeah,
it went down.
It went down.
So
it went down.
that's talking about doing good from the standpoint that this was
perhaps bad public policy, and
Very
you know.
Good. Okay, so that's a good example. And water districts are a continual source of fun, aren't they?
Oh, they really, really are. And you know, and this is again where you sort of cross. There's the line. I'm completely objective. There are, you know, about 70 special districts in California. You know, that's too many. You know, and we're sort of at that freedom where we say, you know, why do we need 25 different water agencies in Orange County? It's not that big, you know. I mean, as far as counties go, we're pretty compact. So, you know, that's kind of been a bit of a horse that we've been riding for many years, since the bankruptcy. You might remember the Orange County bankruptcy. Right. That was when you've looked at all the agencies that had money in the investment pool, and you're like, these don't exist anymore. I mean, the Santa Ana Heights, you know, library district had folded decades earlier, and it still had money in the county investment pool. So you're like, is this really a system that's working? So that's kind of been a bit of a pet issue of mine for quite some years. You
object to some extent to the term, even though that's what the paper calls you, an investigative reporter. You say you don't like that term, investigative reporter. What's wrong with being an investigative reporter?
Because everybody's an investigative reporter. I mean, by taking the basic action of what I do and what, you know, these other accountability reporters do, we look at paper. We read things, and then we look at numbers and we try to figure out what they mean. And that's what every single reporter does and should be doing.
Well, should be doing. I would say we've just gone through an interesting election campaign. I'm not sure what the media does nowadays very much of it is investigative reporting. It's like horse race watching, as you say, it's furry cats or whatever, you know,
Dogs with
celebrities.
sweaters, yeah.
But go ahead. All right. So, but you're saying a reporter should investigate.
Yeah, and they should, you know, and it's just a matter of really watching. I mean, that's what we're doing. I mean, most people have lives, and, you know, they don't have time to go look at the city council agenda and see, you know, what they're doing. You know, there's an item for, you know, sky surveillance. You know, there was a big one from the Orange County Vector Control District, another one of my favorites. They get rid of the mosquitoes and other, you know, bad bug carried disease, and they should be their own government, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you know, you can argue either side of that. You know, they're going to spend, you know, $250,000 to take pictures of the entire county from the air to see where the green pools are, so that they can put some, you know, fish. That's a, you know, that's fun, but that's something that, you know, some people went nuts about that, and some people thought that that was good, and they got rid of the mosquito infested pools by putting a little fish in. So those are the little things that we can do.
I referenced at the top how there's fewer reporters nowadays. Obviously, newspapers, you know, hard times for newspapers. The internet, technology has had a big impact. How has that impacted what you do? How has the internet and technology impacted your job?
That's an interesting question, because it has changed over time. But, you know, it used to be that we produced something that would fit in a hole around the ads, you know, on a piece of paper. Then the Register, for quite a few years, was a digital first sort of operation. We referred to the newspaper as the Deadwood edition, and we didn't worry about it. And that, I think, was a mistake, because most of our revenue still comes from the print edition and not from online. But we went all online, and we sort of did this as an afterthought, and we went bankrupt, as you might recall, because the advertising revenue from online was not as great as it was from print. But when we went online, we had a freedom that was wonderful. I mean, we wrote, I mean, it was really a bottom-up thing. I decided what I wrote. I decided when I wrote it. I decided when I posted it. I wrote my headlines. I picked the pictures, and I was in control of the entire publishing system. Perhaps my editors now don't like that idea, but it was a great time for me, and I loved that. I loved that move to online and being entrusted with that much.
How about as far as investigating as a watchdog? Do the new tools on the internet make your job easier, harder? Anybody can do it. You know, how do you feel about that? The
Advances in the last, you know, even just 5 or 6 years have radically transformed accountability journalism, and the ability for anyone to do accountability journalism. I think we were talking before about, you know, back in the day, before the state was publishing public compensation data, I mean, we would literally spend months knocking on doors, begging for, you know, contracts and perks, and putting things in spreadsheets, and having this city argue that this city wasn't telling the truth and was leaving out that, and you had this mess, and it was very hard to get to the truth. And I did this with water districts, you know, back in 2010, and it was just like they were fighting with each other so much about who was lying and who was. It just was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to leave this part out. I'm just using this, because it was impossible. After Bell. After Barbara Kogerman, the city of Bell, when the city manager was paying himself more than $1 million a year, and, you know, nearly bankrupting this tiny little working class city, the state controller said, yeah, you know what? Why don't you all just tell me what's, you know, we're not going to argue about all these little pockets. What's in box 5 of the W-2 that you're sending to the federal government? I'm going to take that, and I'm publishing it. That was radical. I mean, a radical, huge step for transparency in the state of California. And it's, you know, that database now, which has got, you know, 7 years of data now, lets us look at, you know, how things have grown, how pension costs have grown over time. There are mostly firefighters in California that are tripling their pay with overtime and and playing some of these, these rules about when you can take it and how it counts, is that what we wanted? And that's something that we can see now like that, where we couldn't get at that before.
And I think that's one of the great services that the Watchdog performs, because it's there. Nobody else is writing about it. You go through the data and explain that. You referenced pension spiking. And so maybe people don't, the idea is you've made this much, here was your salary when you retire, and you'll get a percentage of that, 80% or whatever, 50%, 80% for the rest. And that's pretty typical now for public employees, something like that. But it's not really 80% because they do things. Explain that.
Well, there's COLA, they get increases every year, which, is nice,
That's cost of living
adjustments. And what was happening a lot, which has been changed with the governor's 2013 PEPRA, it's called. It was a little change to the pension laws in California, which will help eventually, not right now, but eventually.
By the way, I just had Sean Nelson on, the supervisor, and he talked about PEPRA. This is probably the only time in the history of television that a show has had guests refer to PEPRA 2 times in a row. So now the viewers of Inside OC know what PEPRA is. Okay, go ahead.
Yes.
All right.
But what people were doing would be, and they can't do this anymore, but they would be working more hours. They would get a supervisorial job right, the year before they retired, so that, they would get this big bump in the last year, and it would, radically increase what they would.
And they would also, like if they had a motorcycle patrol, if they're an officer, a police officer, and they're on a motorcycle, they would get additional pay, and that would go into the formula to calculate their pension. So they wound up with salaries, as you say, much, much higher, or a formula much, much higher than what they actually earned. So they're retiring at 100% or even more.
Yeah, well, this goes to this pension envy question, and I've been writing about this pension envy, which is what the some of the employee union folks throw at me, because I think it's pretty clear. I'm politically not to the right. I am not to the left. I think of myself as a pretty middle of the road taxpayer kind of person, and.
Well, that puts you to the right of most journalists, you realize, but it was,
maybe.
I just wanted to throw that in. Go ahead. Editorial comment. You don't have to comment on that. All right.
But the fact of the matter is that these are costs that we have to pay. We will have to pay this. This is in California, even in bankruptcy court. None of the cities that have gone into bankruptcy court have asked to adjust their pension formulas, but the public safety pensions. Which were passed largely in the wake of 9/11, when there was, a groundswell of, patriotism and support for public safety workers. This 3% at 50 is, going to almost bankrupt.
Right.
The Orange County Fire Authority is on paper.
Right, and what I love about what you do is you just lay the facts out there, and people love firefighters, and the the jobs that the safety officers do is tough work, and there are many people who would say, hey, they deserve whatever they get, but you're laying the facts out there so people can make those decisions. Now, one of the things you do, and I referenced this too, is you kind of do this with a light hand. I think there'd be a tendency with the kind of thing you do to have righteous indignation over these kinds of, scandals, waste, whatever. But you kind of have a good time with it. Is that just your nature, or is that by design that you guys do that?
I think that is just my nature, because, I really don't think that there's any better theater than government, especially local government. And it's comedy. It is really high comedy in a lot of ways, and that's, I might get in trouble for saying that, but there's a lot of goofy stuff going on, and I think the last year and a half has borne that out at all levels. It's been a goofy kind of season.
Yeah, in fact, we have just gone through an election, and I probably would be remiss not to at least get your impression of this historic, unusual, world-changing, whatever election we've just been through. Any thoughts, and maybe how it applies to here in Southern California?
Well, The fact that Orange County went blue for the first time since 1936 is amazing to me because it still can't pick a winner. It's just really interesting. But the Republican Party in Orange County, I mean, and this, is the heart of big money, dependable Republican donors. I mean, they have a lot of work to do to figure out what they're going to be spending their money on, and who they're going to be spending their money on and how to proceed. The populism. The Trump agenda is not a conservative agenda, a lot of pundits are saying, and that's the way a lot of the folks in the Republican Party in Orange County felt. I enjoyed hearing their take on the election. I think one of my favorites was I talked to a gentleman who was in the a Republican administration of a couple of governors ago, and I said, "How are you enjoying this election?" And he said, "I am under my desk, curled up in the fetal position with my thumb in my mouth." I think that.
And that's a Republican
and
in
that
Orange
was a
County.
Republican.
Okay,
So you sort of get that there's a lot of groundswell, and to be fair, 43% of the voters in the country did not vote, just chose to sit this out. So what's happened is happened amongst a minority of the electorate, but it's something there's anger and there's a lot of issues that need to be addressed by all levels of government.
Let's talk a little bit about Teri Sforza. And you are the, I'm getting personal now. You're almost a journalism power couple. You and your husband, Jeff Light, he is the editor and now also the publisher of the UT, the Union Tribune in San Diego. So you must have some interesting dinner conversations.
Yeah, we're mostly pulling our hair out all the time. What's gonna happen here? No, the UT's doing pretty well financially. They've got my former colleague Ricky Young and Morgan Cook doing some good work down there on their Watchdog. They stole our name. They took the Watchdog name for their column. I forgive them.
So if you sue, you're suing your husband, basically.
Yeah.
If you were to, how interesting. Now Jeff used to be at the Register, and so now he's in San Diego.
Yeah.
So where do you guys? That's one of you has a long commute. How do you do that?
That would be me. That would be me. We still have our Orange County house, but yeah, we're also down in San Diego where my girls go to school, and so I do a lot of driving.
Wow. So on the weekends, or do you stay here, or do you just got a long commute every day? You're going to.
No, I don't do. No, thank you to my bosses. So much of what I do is on paper, is from paper and databases. So I sit in a little corner, by myself a lot, which makes me sort of strange and really very eager to talk to people when I get out. So I do a lot of data, just a lot of data work, and I'm on the phone, and so I'm up here, a couple of times a week. And,
all right. And you're not just a muckraker. You're an author, and you're a documentarian. Talk about a book and about a documentary that you've done.
There's it was a really fascinating project. There was a Dr. Howard Lenhoff at UCI, biochemist, one of the founding faculty members of UCI, and his wife Sylvia. They had a daughter who was, there were all sorts of words over the years, but she was, developmentally delayed, I think, cognitively delayed. But she had this amazing capacity for music. I mean, she couldn't add, 2 and 2. She, couldn't do any, couldn't follow simple directions like go down the hall and make a right to the restroom. Couldn't find it. But she could memorize pieces of classical music that were, 30 or 40 minutes, long in German and in Armenian, these, crazy, crazy abilities she had. And Dr. Lenhoff said, this is really interesting. And he found out when she was an adult that she had a condition called Williams syndrome, which is where a tiny little bit of one chromosome is missing, but it has a profound.
It's called Williams.
It's called Williams syndrome after a doctor in England who first discovered this, and it's characterized by all these heart problems, but also by this very uneven cognitive profile where these people, and again, it goes to this very uncomfortable idea that behavior ability is genetic. And he noted when she was diagnosed as having Williams syndrome, he started going to these conventions and he saw that they looked alike, these people, and they also had these strange abilities, musical abilities, verbal abilities.
And we're almost out of time, so
Okay. Yes.
to cut to the chase, you wrote a book about it called
called The Strangest Song, and it's about Dr. Lenthoff, pushing this idea that that music and this genetic condition were linked, and he was right.
Fantastic. Well, we don't have time right now to talk about your documentary film, The Boy Monk, but we will do that right now when we go to our open mic segment, so viewers can check that out on online. So, Teri, again, thanks so much. Thanks so much for coming on. Well, that's it for now. Thanks again to my guest, Teri Sforza. You can watch this show and past shows by going to pbssocal.org or rickreiff.com. You can also catch our shows and our post-show open mic chatter, which you're about to do, on YouTube. And follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by 5 Point. 5 Point is an independent real estate development company with assets under management across California. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
Memorial Care is transforming the way healthcare is delivered, keeping our communities and businesses healthy by guiding them on the path to wellness with easily accessible hospitals, physician offices, and outpatient centers. Memorial Care, leading the way.